You are listening to the Fit Figure Formula podcast. I help female perfectionists beat self-sabotage and lose the weight for good using the Fit Figure Formula coaching program. I'm your host, Stephanie Riles, registered dietitian, personal trainer, and mindset transformation coach. If you've been struggling with all or nothing thinking, negative self-talk, or self-sabotage, this is the podcast for you. Learn how to get consistent and become the best version of yourself from the inside out. So let's get started. All right, and welcome back to another episode of the Fit Figure Formula podcast. So today I have a very special guest, Lisa Salisbury, who is going to talk to us more about the Clean Plate Club. Welcome, Lisa. Thanks for joining me on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's talk about first, tell us who you are, who you serve, and what you do.
Okay, great. So I'm Lisa Salisbury. I am also a coach. I primarily coach women with emotional eating. So women that are wanting to just kind of stop the superfluous eating around meals or sometimes just the overeating during meals. And it kind of all gets back to emotional eating. I am what I consider a recovered chronic dieter. I just dieted on and on and on ever since I was quite young, like started in high school, but it was pointed out really early on, like by fifth grade, that I was too big for proper bodies, right? Like it was always like, oh, you haven't lost your baby fat yet. And so a lot of messages about that through my growing up years. And so that just led to a lot of chronic just fad dieting, just jumping from one thing to another. And when I realized that I could start depending on my body to help me decide how much to eat and to really get in tune with that rather than constantly checking in with a diet app, like how much do I have left? I'm going to just eat like lunch meat in front of the refrigerator to meet my protein macros. Like it wasn't making sense anymore for me. And I realized it was causing like a big increase in anxiety to have to try to meet what my diet app was saying. And so I came to coaching from that space and realized this was kind of like the missing piece to all of the diets. It's kind of like, if you don't feel like eating what they say to eat, then what do you do? And so that's kind of the space I coach in, is the when you don't feel like it, or when you're, eating for comfort or compensation or celebration, like how do we kind of limit those so that we can get back on our weight loss trend that we want to do? So that's who I coach. I also host a podcast called Eat Well, Think Well, Live Well, and which you were on just a few weeks ago. So we've done a great pod swap here. So yeah, that's a little bit about where I come from.
Cool. I love it because there's more than one way to skin a cat when it comes to nourishing your body, reaching your goals. And that mindful piece is super duper important. So I'm glad that we're talking about that today. So tell us more about the Clean Plate Club, because when you first said that, I wasn't exactly sure what it was, but then when you explained it, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, we've all heard of that. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, it's interesting because most of us have heard that phrase, like clean your plate or be part of the Clean Plate Club. I'm admittedly quite a bit older than you. So I kind of grew up in the 80s, and it was really common then, to be in the Clean Plate Club. And I started to get really curious about that recently. I was like, why do we all use that phrase? And it turns out the Clean Plate Club was actually a government program during World War I and then revised again in World War II. And it had to do with the food rations that were going on, because America, we really were sending food to recovering European nations, not only during the war, but mostly after. And so that was in the time where our grandparents were like eating in a school cafeteria with actual cafeteria ladies that made meals on site, right? Not like our kids now, they get like a prepackaged Uncrustable. Like it was, not like that. They were really literally going through the line and dishing up their food. And so the idea of the Clean Plate Club program back then was to just take what you needed and to not waste food, so that it was to help the kids understand we really did need to send food to families that were struggling to recover in Europe. So the problem is what I kind of conjecture from that is our grandparents really were members of the Clean Plate Club. And then they taught our parents, hey, there's starving children. And at that time, where were they? Maybe Korea, wherever the conflict was. And then in the 80s, my parents told me there's starving children in Africa. Right,
Mm-hmm.
because that was during the some of the famines there, and the truth is, there are starving children all over the world all the time, even right here in America. But what we need to do is disconnect us cleaning our plate from those that are suffering. We can help with that suffering without putting extra food in our bodies and thinking that's going to help some other child not suffer. Because the truth is, during the war in the recovery time, we probably were sending food, but that's just like not how the mechanics are working today. And so we need to really disconnect from the idea that us cleaning our plate is somehow going to help another individual, or that we are, not doing the right thing anymore. So part of the issue too with the Clean Plate Club and the idea of cleaning your plate is that our portions are so much larger now. And this kind of speaks to that. There was a study in the early 2000s, I want to say 2016, where they studied this like portion distortion that is occurring. So like a bagel in the 80s was about 3 inches across, and a bagel today, or during the time of the study, was 6 inches across. So we're given a bagel, which we consider a portion, regardless of what the nutrition information says on the back of the package, what a serving is. A portion is what we're served, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So we're given a portion, which is a bagel, and we're like, oh, I should finish this portion. And it's not just what we're being served at restaurants that is so large. No waiter has ever asked me, no server has ever asked me, like, how hungry are you today? Like, how much should I dish up on this plate? Like, there's a standard amount. If my husband and I order the same thing, they bring us the same amount. And without regard to what we've eaten in the day, what our workout was, our body size, our needs, right? There's no regard to that. And so we're served these extra large portions. And then we grew up with this better clean your plate. And it's like very disconnecting in our brains. Even in like The Joy of Cooking, which is a cookbook that's come out multiple times, the same brownie recipe in the 80s served like, I think it's 24, and now it serves 16. Same pan size. So we're even being encouraged when we cook at home to cut our brownies larger portions. And so when we combine this feeling like we need to clean our plates with the larger portions we're serving, it's leading to a lot of overeating.
Right. And so my next question was going to be like, why do you think giving up the Clean Plate Club is so essential to weight loss?
Yeah. So we have to get over the idea that every plate has to be clean when we're done. Mostly this is occurring like as we're eating out, right? Because of that, like not deciding how much portions we're given. But even at home, when you dish up yourself, you kind of have a habit of how much you dish up, right? If you make tacos, I always have two, or I always have, this much rice with this much stir fry. Like it's kind of a standard habit. And we tend to clean that. We tend to eat all of that out of habit without regard to checking in with our body, because our calorie needs and our energy needs absolutely can fluctuate, not only day to day, but as women throughout the month. According to our cycle, our calorie requirements can change. And so it's not a good idea to like have a set like calorie goal, but because most, and I don't know how you coach, but most will give you like a range. I find these days that most people aren't giving you like an exact calorie down to like the point,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
down to the tens. And so when you think about that range, that gives you the flexibility to say, I'm going to leave a few bites behind today. And we have to be okay with that, because if we're full, we're full. Like we don't need to eat more just because our app says you need to get a certain number of grams of protein. If you leave a few bites behind, like tragedy is not going to strike. This is where I was like in my dieting days. I'm like so anxious if I didn't finish everything because I had pre-weighed it. And I'm like, but I have to get that because that was what I logged. And it just led to some overeating when I just really didn't need that. And then on days where I was more hungry, I just was stuck being hungry instead of having a little less on less hungry days and then having a little more on more hungry days, again according to my cycle, and then it evens out in the end. So if we can get used to letting food go, letting food be, wasted, if you will, I think we can make a big difference in our habit eating, how much we just habitually eat, and then just getting back in touch with our own bodies and our own hunger scale.
Yeah, and I think that when you were talking, it just reminded me of like having a relationship with yourself, being able to kind of check in with yourself and say, okay, how am I feeling? I always tell my clients, ask yourself, am I satisfied? Am I satisfied versus like, am I hungry? Because you can find some hunger if you're still looking for hunger, but you can also find satisfaction if you're looking for satisfaction. So what can we do with the thoughts about wasting food? What do you suggest with your clients?
Yeah, wasting food can be such an issue, especially for those of us that have like lived through, college days or early married days where we're like, we were scraping for every penny. And so I just don't like to see food go down the drain. And certainly I'm not encouraging you to just like constantly throw food away. So a couple things that we can do is start really questioning how much you're putting on your own plate. Start really saying, is this the amount that I truly need? And you can just start with less. And that will really help you because you can always go get a little bit more. But if you hate to throw it away, if there's leftovers, you can package those up for tomorrow. Most people don't want to package up what's actually on their plate. I don't know why, but people, after they start eating it, they're like, no, that doesn't go in the leftover container. If you live alone, I'm like, definitely, you could just save that. But we want to get really clear too on where the thoughts are coming from. If it's coming from a money scarcity, like I said, like when we've lived through those kind of like leaner times, which I'm not discounting, but we want to be clear about, is this like a money issue? Honestly, I've done this exercise with clients where they will actually take a grocery receipt from the week and they'll calculate, and turns out it's like 22 cents they're throwing away. And they're like, I actually am okay with that. So you can calculate out like the cost of food. You can calculate out like portion costs. And if you're really stuck in the money thoughts about it, I would encourage you to do that. Like figure out your cost per serving. And then you're like, okay, I've thrown away 1/10 of a serving. How much is that now? It's not as much as you think when you're cooking from home, right? So that's one thing to attack it from, like a money scarcity thing. And then the other way we can attack this is this is just like an exercise. I wouldn't say to do this forever. This is just like a 1 or 2 week exercise. Get a Ziploc bag, put it in your freezer. And every time you're like, I think I'm done, and there's 2 bites behind or half a sandwich or whatever it is, put it in the bag. Put it in the freezer so it doesn't get gross, right? So you just freeze it. And then at the end of the week, like look at it and be like, how do I feel this week? Am I feeling any hungrier than normal? Like really think about, like, was I suffering? Because we don't want that, right? We don't want suffering hunger. And if you weren't, if you were like, I actually felt really good and on track this week, then you take a look at the food and realize, okay, this is how much that I cannot dish up next week. So it helps you to just kind of adjust your portions. And I think that's really where we want to get ahead of the wasting food, is adjusting portions ahead of time. Because sometimes, like, working on the thoughts, like it's okay to waste food or whatever thought you want to replace with, is not as effective as just changing your actions ahead of time. We can just change how we behave and then we don't have to waste. And at the same time, I'm always like, do you want to waste it in the trash, or do you want to waste the time and effort getting it off your ass?
That's a good one. Oh, I'm going to use that. I am definitely going to tell my clients that. And I think too, when we cook food, especially even if we're doing like Thanksgiving, that which just passed or whatever, like I know people who cook for a small army, like they're cooking like just on the front end way too much food. And so now, yes, you do feel obligated to put a lot on your plate because you have a lot in the casserole dish, and just kind of learning how to scale that back is really important.
Totally. Which I can, so I have 4 kids, but I only have one left at home. And the older two are boys. And so I went from feeding like 2 teenage boys and 2 girls, and then I'm having to adjust. And now I just have one teenage girl who like literally eats like one meal a day. I'm like, oh, I got to scale this back. So, as your family changes, as it grows and expands and then, gets smaller, you do have to really adjust how much meat you're buying, how much rice you're preparing. And yeah, I'm so used to just cooking the entire box of pasta. And I'm like, I gotta stop doing that. Like,
Yeah, that's just like a habit thing. So how can we
totally.
break our habit eating?
Habit eating is, I think, one of the most common ways we overeat is because it's what we always order. It's what we always choose. It's what we always dish up. And so just starting with saying, I'm just going to leave 2 bites behind at every meal this week and just see how I feel. 2 bites is not going to make or break your hunger at that moment, but it's going to help you question, do I need that much? And this is primarily, let me say too, this is primarily for people when I start working with them who are either on a weight gain trend or on where they're maintaining, they've gained in the past and they're maintaining that higher weight. It's not, if you're listening and you're already on a weight loss trend, this is not for you. Right? We don't need you to eat less if you're already trending in the right direction. You're already working with stuff. You're already like, my weight's trending in the direction I want it to go. I don't want you to be eating less than you're already eating if you're already losing weight. So I'm speaking to those that are like, I can't figure out why I'm not losing weight, or I can't figure out why I continue to gain weight. That's when we want to like question our portions. Like, do I need this much? The other area that I think habit eating really comes in is when we have like afternoon snacks or just snacking when other people are eating. I had a client who always would have a snack when her kids came home from school because the kids were having a snack. She was fixing them a snack. And so her brain is like, it's eating time. It's time for eating because the kids are eating. But she had just eaten lunch at like 2 o'clock. And so her body really wasn't ready or in need of more food. It was just a habit. So that's another area. It's not just finishing your plate habits, but you want to like look at the times that you're eating. And am I eating because I always eat at this time or because my body's actually saying it's time for some fuel?
Yeah, and this happens too, like sometimes when it's time to watch a movie. Like with my son last night, it's like, oh, popcorn, where's the popcorn? Where's the popcorn? Or if you sit down and this is like your certain chair, like this is my chair. And by my chair, I have, a little candy jar and I sit there after work and I have my candy. Or I walk in the door, put my stuff down, I have to get a glass of wine because I'm about to go sit in my favorite chair. And it's just like questioning those things
Yeah,
and being more aware of them.
totally.
Um, Tell me more about creating the 24-hour practical plan.
Oh, yeah. That's something that I do with my clients to um, really just look at their whole day at one time. And this helps a lot of times when we're trying to get out of really strict, like fad diets. We tend to be a person who thinks about food a lot. I notice this also with women who tend to be the primary food managers of their home. So they're the hunter gatherers, right? They are the ones that go to the grocery store and go to Costco, and they're in charge of the meal planning, and they're in charge of packing the lunches and cooking the dinner. That's obviously a very traditional description, but I still find it to be pretty common in my clients. And then also I have several single women clients, and so of course they're doing all of that. So we're thinking about food all of the time. And then when we start to think, I want to lose weight, then it's like all I ever think about is food. And so one of the ways that the 24-hour practical plan really helps is to think about food in the morning, and you write down, these are the things I'm going to eat today. I'm going to have this for breakfast, this for lunch, this for dinner. I don't have people write down exact amounts. It's not like I'm going to have 4 ounces of chicken breast and a half a cup of rice and etc. Just I'm having, chicken and rice and salad on the side. So we just like list the items that we're eating, and we think about food basically once in the day. And that way we're not having this constant food chatter of like, what am I going to have next? What if there's not enough? What if, like, a lot of times we tend to have more peace at breakfast or lunch when we know what's coming, because some of this is coming from like our primitive brains that we're always on the lookout for food. This is what's kept us alive for millions of years as humans, is to be on the lookout for food. Our brains have not really caught up with the fact that we have refrigeration in grocery stores and restaurants around every corner. If you think about how long that's been a thing for humans, like humans generally, it's not very long, a couple hundred years. So our brains are always on the lookout for when is it going to be our next meal. And so when we create a 24-hour plan and we just write down like, here's what we're having for the day, it creates a lot of peace and security for your brain. And so you can let go of some of that constant food chatter, right? Because food chatter is just annoying, right? Mm-hmm. Yep. And we tend to overeat when we're not sure when or what our next meal is going to be. And so it just gives you a lot of peace. And then it also helps you to know when you are in a craving mode, because if you don't have it written down and your brain is like, oh, you know what we should do is have some popcorn, and it wasn't planned, then you can say, oh, okay, that's a craving right now. What am I going to do with that? And then lastly, it puts our higher brain in charge. So again, if we think about how our brains are built, we kind of have a lower brain, which is that primitive animal brain, and then we have a higher human brain. Animals don't have that part. They're not able to plan ahead. The higher human brain is the one that helps make decisions for the future. So when we are planning, we are automatically using our higher brain. When we grab something in the moment, it tends to be a feel-good thing. It tends to be like, what's going to satisfy me right now? And that's a lower brain thing. That's a lower brain looking for dopamine, looking for serotonin, looking for comfort. And so we want to make our food decisions from our best brain, and that's our higher brain. So when we decide ahead of time what we're going to eat, we automatically know we're making those decisions from our higher human brain.
Cool. I like that. In the science perspective, when I talk about it with my clients, I'm kind of talking about the same thing I'm talking about, like your 1.0 self or your 2.0 self, and kind of like splitting those two and identifying the fact that I are seeing myself in a different way, that like, oh, I have a choice. I have autonomy. And even if, for example, you're an emotional eater, you have labeled yourself as emotional eating, and you think about, maybe I emotionally ate yesterday, but I tell my clients, don't keep saying I'm an emotional eater. You say, I used to be an emotional eater, because you are becoming, what are you becoming right now? You can't keep saying that I'm an emotional eater as you're becoming something else. That just doesn't work. So that kind of reminded me of the same thing, like making sure that you are kind of having that relationship with yourself and noticing, oh, there's a craving. That awareness in and of itself is really powerful. And then to know that where that's coming from, and then to go into your higher brain or your CEO self, your 2.0 self, and say, okay, what would she do? And then practice making that decision. Did that make sense?
Totally. Yeah. Okay. I love the 2.0 self.
Yes. Okay, cool. This has been so helpful. I know a lot of my clients have struggled with this in the past. So if you got something from this episode, make sure that you share the episode, share the podcast. Lisa, can you let the audience know where they can reach you on social media or the internet?
Yeah. So I'm, like I said before, I also host a podcast, Eat Well, Think Well, Live Well. I have a free download right now called What to Do When You Overeat, because we're all human and we don't want to get too crazy when we overeat. I find some people are either they jump to being too strict, and beating themselves up, or it's like throw your hands up in the air, it's a free for all. So this guide just helps you split the difference there and kind of recover from those times that we overeat so they can happen fewer and farther in between. So you can find, I think we'll put that, I think I gave you that link. And then you can also find me on Instagram at well_with_Lisa. I hate the underscores, but sometimes that's what happens.
All right, I'm going to put all of those links in the show notes. So if you are interested in picking up that freebie or following Lisa on Instagram, make sure you check out the show notes. So Lisa, thanks again for being here.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, you guys, I'll see you on the next episode.
Thanks for listening to the Fit Figure Formula podcast. If you're new here and you're struggling with your fitness journey, I invite you to take a super simple next step. Click the link in the show notes for a free training. If listening to this podcast has been helpful, imagine being inside the Formula Coaching Program. You can apply for coaching with the link in the show notes. I hope to see you inside.